Hi, B.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, I'm so happy to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thank you for doing this.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Really, and it's early morning there, isn't it?
No, I'm actually in London, so it's 2 p.m.
Ooh, are you doing some work with Uranio at that London church place?
No, we just finished two of our inner work retreats here. We did two 5-day retreats that ended yesterday. So I'm getting to use his office for the
I thought
call.
it looked familiar.
Yeah, yeah. And then I leave to go back home to San Francisco on Tuesday.
Oh, wow. So you're going to have a little bit of time to just reset before you go home.
A little bit. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Although Uranio's wife invited me to make Thanksgiving dinner on Sunday tomorrow, so not as much rest as I thought, but it'll be fun.
Yeah. And you couldn't escape Thanksgiving.
Yeah, apparently, yeah. But at the retreat center, they made us a Thanksgiving, so that was nice too.
Okay. Oh, that's sweet. And how did the retreats go?
Great. They went really well.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so lovely. I see Debs is here. I'm so grateful that you agreed to do this. It's just so generous.
It's my pleasure.
And anything you want to share in the chat, links to your stuff, please. I know Renata will send stuff out afterwards,
Okay.
but we also just want to make that just so that you know absolutely. And if you want to announce anything, go ahead.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. And did you have four retreats, 5 days and 5 days, or was it level one and level two? How does it work?
Well, we we're doing a series of retreats, and these were actually the third and fourth in a series of retreats. So these were more experienced students. We knew them already, so we went deeper, more
Wow.
spiritual. It was great.
Mhm. Wow, that's amazing to have a group go like that for 5 days at a time.
Yeah.
Whew, that must be the deep end. And
Yes.
was Rena there as well?
Um, who?
What's her name?
Oh,
Albatri. Rena
Dina?
Albatri.
Dina. Yes, Dina
Dina.
was
I
here.
called her
Yeah,
Rena,
Dina
sorry.
was here. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was great.
Oh, that's so wonderful. She's gorgeous. Hey? Hello, everybody. Hello, Mandy, Lee, Debbie, and
Hello.
so good to see you.
Thank you.
And there's Getty, Sonelia. I don't think we know each other. I'm Renata's co-host if you came via her. And
Hi,
hi,
Ingrid.
hi, how you doing? I have met you
Um,
before.
yes, I think we have at some of the Enneagram integrative events might have been. I worked for Integrative for a bit in 2019. So I know you by reputation, though.
I recognize
A
you. I hope
good
it's a
thing.
good reputation,
It
please.
is. It is. It is. It is. It's good to
Oh,
see you.
you too. Who else just popped in?
Mhm.
Hey,
Dad, hi,
Deb.
England.
Hi, how are
Happy,
you?
Okay.
happy, nice to see you again.
Hi, great to see you too.
Fiona,
Good to see
Getty,
some familiar faces. Hi, good.
what's
Thank you.
going on? Getty, what's going on with you? You're aging backwards.
About being so happy right now that holidays are around the corner.
Uh,
I'm living for the 15th.
Okay.
We can't hear you so well, Getty.
Yeah, we can't. Now you're on mute, so we definitely can't hear you well now. I'm going to make you co-host, B, so that if you want to share anything, you can.
Great.
And Getty, if I can make a third co-host, I'm also going to make you one in case I get kicked off or anything as backup, okay? Eileen and Ryan, Tammy, welcome, welcome. Ryan, it's great to have you here. I know you so well from Facebook. Can I see what you look like? Hi, Karen.
How's it going?
Oh, good to have you
Yeah,
here.
nice to see your
So,
face.
welcome, welcome to our space. And Eileen, yay, some new people. Marcus, welcome. What's the time? We usually start at around 5 past, so we can just have some intros. And I don't know if everybody you want to put in the chat which city you're in at the moment, where you are in the world. I'm in Johannesburg, South Africa, but I'll put it there. Claudel, welcome. Did I miss someone into it? Claudia, lovely to see you. Anna, Kim, Robin, Tracy. Welcome, welcome. Tracy, Kim, Jessica. Who don't I know? Hi, Claudel.
Hey, good
Lovely.
afternoon.
Welcome. It's so lovely to have all of you wonderful people and new people joining. Yippee! Exactly. Where do I find that thing myself? There you go. Catherine. B, you brought all your friends with you. There's so many people here who knew. Yelena. Hi, Dave. We're putting in the chat where we are currently. Harare. Oh yeah, I forgot you were there, Nola. How cool. That's so beautiful. No worries, Getty. Oh yeah, Mexico. No worries, Anna. It's lovely to have you here. Yelena, what time is it there?
After 1 o'clock, so in the morning, Australia.
Did you hear that, B? Somebody got up at 1 o'clock in the morning. Oh, you're on mute, B?
Wow, I'm honored. Thank you for being up so late or early, as the case may be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
Wow.
wonderful.
Wow.
So B, okay, no problem, Fiona. Wow, congratulations. That's so exciting. B, we usually start off with a bit of a centering exercise, like a presencing, arriving something. Would you be happy to do that as well? Deb is going to introduce you before maybe we start that. Being the person that orchestrated this whole thing coming into being. So, Deb, you're going to do that, and then we'll do the presencing, and then we'll get started. How does that work?
Sounds
That's
good.
fine. Okay, great.
Yeah, and I'm very happy for you to lead a presencing. It helps me to arrive also.
Yeah, okay. I usually like someone else to do it too, as the host.
I can lead it if you'd like.
That'll really show your level of spiritual elevation that you can arrive with a new group and put us all there. Okay.
No problem.
Okay. So let's hand over to Deb, who was recently on one of your workshops and has become such an extreme fan and evangelist for you that she made this happen. And Deb, over to you.
Okay, so hi everyone, and nice to see some new faces. I'm in very warm Cape Town, South Africa, beautiful place to be at the moment. I'm going to start off by just introducing and reading your profile, if you don't mind, B, and then I'm just going to share a little as to why I invited you here. So B, we call her B, most of us who know her, though her formal name is BEATRICE CHESTNUT. She's a psychotherapist, coach, and business consultant based in San Francisco. She holds graduate degrees in communication and clinical psychology and is author of the books The Complete Enneagram, 27 Paths to Greater Self-Knowledge, The 9 Types of Leadership, Mastering the Art of People in the 21st Century Workplace, and more recently, she's co-authored a book with Uranio Paes, The Enneagram Guide to Waking Up. She's been a student of the Enneagram for over 30 years. And B, I'm sure you'll share some of your first learnings with some of the Enneagram greats. She was president of the International Enneagram Association in 2006 and 2007. And she currently works with leaders and teams and offers Enneagram workshops internationally through the school she co-founded with Uranio Paes Uranio Paes Chestnut Paes Enneagram Academy. Okay, so it's the CP Enneagram. We call it CP. And my introduction to B was obviously B, I'd read your books and I knew about your work. But I was at a point in my life where I was looking to deepen my Enneagram spiritual and psychological journey. Like many of you here, I'm an Enneagram coach, and my biggest learning is that we cannot coach unless we're constantly working at a very deep level ourselves. And I have always been committed to my inner work. And I wanted to get more exposure outside of my country, which is South Africa, and we have a wonderful network of people. This is this community of practice we have. And I wanted to really, start understanding what is out there beyond the training that I'd initially got. And I was trained with IQ9, which I found very valuable I found a very valuable report. I learned so much. And very much got mentored by Renata Landman, as many of you know, in my Enneagram journey. But I was looking for something deeper. And at one point, I was considering going to the international conference this year that took place. And I was grappling with it. I have a son who lives in the USA, so I thought, okay, I can mix the two. And then my gut kind of said, well, why do you want to go to a conference where you hear a tidbit of little things from everybody? Personally, I also was not that excited about going to the US at that time. So I started looking more broadly. And as I was looking and researching, I came across the work that the CP Enneagram does. And then, by the way, I realized, oh, Beatrice CHESTNUT's involved. I didn't know Uranio. And so that's how I ended up at the retreat in London, which was a wonderful place to be. We had so much diversity in your London programs because we've got such a mix. And it felt, okay, for South Africans to get to London is slightly easier than to get, especially to California. California is a very long trip for us. And I joined the psychological retreat. But the main reason I asked B is during that retreat, I started understanding the depth of both the psychological and the spiritual journey, and as well as some of the somatic work, because we did all three. But I started what I hadn't quite got up to then, and maybe others are different, but I hadn't quite got how the self-understanding, particularly of our instincts, together with our types. And I came away thinking, oh my gosh, I thought I was a type 2. I'm an SX2. And I realized that probably the thing that drives so much of my behavior is the SX. And the 2 is sometimes by the way, but sometimes at the forefront and sometimes not. But always, when I wake up, when I go to sleep, what I choose to do and not do through the day is driven by my instinct. And so I became very interested in the work of what we were doing there. And so when I asked B to come, I really wanted you, B, and I sent you a little brief to link type and instinct, but very much how we work through levels of development, and you have a particular approach to that, to get to a level where we're really able to understand what is running the show within us. Because we hear, I found that often I'd known I'd had to work on my shadow areas, my triggers, but that felt like just buzzwords. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel essential. And I needed tools to be able to understand what is happening in the moment, in these relationships, in my energy levels, etc. And so I chatted to B and I said, B, any chance you can run this in South Africa? And she said, probably not. I said, okay, then will you come and speak at our community of practice? But maybe on the card sometime you will come to South Africa. There aren't as many South Africans on this group as usual because we're coming towards holiday time and it's a very busy period, summer for us. So B, I'm delighted to have you here and to share. But the one thing I want to stress is being with B for 5 days. My experience was it's not about your knowledge. You have extensive knowledge, but the way you would bring out little bits of knowledge for the deepening inner growth and just your way of being, the way you shared examples, the way you showed compassion. That was my biggest learning. So thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you for a beautiful introduction. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. And I just need to second that, having been at conferences in your spaces, just the tenderness that you work with is very moving. And I'm very grateful that we all have you as a role model in terms of the honesty and the gentleness, and getting the truth with love is a beautiful thing. So thank you for that. So yeah, let's maybe you can land us from there, B. I just want to do the backup recording. My AI is recording, but I want to press the Zoom one as well. Okay. You happy to start? Let's all
Sure.
mute ourselves.
Yeah, and let's do take a 2 or 3 minutes just to really arrive and make sure we're really as present as we can be. So if it feels right to you, try to sit up very straight in a posture that favors meditation, and go inside. That feels right to you. And just take a few very deep breaths. Allowing your breath to bring you home to your body, to the present moment. To really let go of anything that was in your mind or your heart or anything you were doing right before you arrived here. Just gently letting that go so that you can really bring your full attention and presence and energy here to this beautiful group. Letting your attention just kind of ride your breath inside and out of your body. And allowing yourself to feel a little bit of gratitude for yourself today, for being here, for your inner work, for your commitment to yourself and this community. Because it's all really about raising our collective level of consciousness. And by bringing your attention to the breath and bringing yourself here to this gathering for these 2 hours, You're doing something very significant. Bringing yourself to your inner work, to this path, to this journey. That will hopefully impact the world around us and be a light to bring everyone in more into presence. And presence really also meaning being awake and alert in all three centers of intelligence, as the Enneagram teaches us. So let's take 3 more conscious breaths together. And bring yourself back to the space where we are together virtually. So welcome. Thank you for being here. It's a big pleasure and honor to be with you. Years ago, I went to South Africa several times in a few years, but haven't been in a long time, and I really miss it. Both just the place, the energy, and the people. So thank you for being here and letting me join your community for a little bit. I've been struggling with a kind of a cold, so I might be drinking tea along the way to facilitate my continued speaking. But I was invited to talk about the instincts and the subtypes, and I'm really glad to be able to talk about those with you today because together with Uranio Paes, my business partner and co-teacher, really what we created our Enneagram school for was to offer really high quality but very deep experiences of the Enneagram. We both teach practitioners, coaches, therapists, spiritual directors, practitioners of all kind how to use the Enneagram with more skill and confidence and depth. And we also have a personal mastery program where we provide opportunities like the one Deborah talked about to do retreats where we apply the Enneagram in a very deep way to help people really do effective inner work. And so our commitment is to depth and to bringing the Enneagram in an effective way, a way that really isn't superficial, but really helps people move the needle, really create progress on their inner work path. And the Enneagram, of course, has enormous power to help us do that, but a lot depends on how we apply that, how we interpret the Enneagram's different theoretical elements and how we put those to work in our journey. Now, Uranio and I use the instincts, the 3 instincts and the 27 subtypes in almost everything we do. It's at the very center of the work we do. And this is because once we learned the approach that we use, which comes directly from Claudio Naranjo, which many of you may be familiar with. So I'll tell a little bit of my story about the subtype. So, and also by way of introducing myself to some of you who may not know me. So I learned the Enneagram kind of by accident. I was just fortunate to learn it from David Daniels, Dr. David Daniels, who some of you may know or may have heard of. I know he started the Narrative Tradition School, one of the big 2 sort of main schools based in the US, teaching the Enneagram, the other being Riso Hudson. He teamed up with Helen Palmer and they started the Narrative Tradition School, which is still going to today. And so I learned it from David Daniels because I was very close friends with his youngest son. I knew his youngest son from age 13. We went to junior high together in high school, and we were very close friends. And then And I am a heart type, so I may get emotional here and there. Then my friend, Dr. Daniel's youngest son, died in 1990 in a completely shocking accident in New York City. And so we were 25, so it was sort of shocking to lose him. But in the wake of his death, the Daniels family, in their enormous courage, really brought in his friends to be with them, very close to them in the days after, as part of the healing journey. And so I got to be closer to Dr. Daniels and his wife Judy and their two children, JD and Denise. And in that time, I got to know the Enneagram just through being with David, Dr. Daniels, more often. And so over dinner one night, he just said, he was telling me all about the Enneagram. And for me, it was amazing because here he is a psychiatrist at Stanford University, really interested in this potentially weird sounding thing called the Enneagram, and teaming up with Helen Palmer, basically a psychic, to start one of the first Enneagram schools. So that was a big deal, and it really got my attention. But what even got my attention even more is when he said, well, I think you might be a 2. So he gave me Helen's book, and I went home and read it. And it just absolutely blew my mind and changed the course of my whole life, because I couldn't believe I hadn't really studied psychology so far until then. I was an English literature major. I studied history in college, and I sort of thought psychology was boring, that it sort of gave obvious names um, to things that were sort of just self-evident. But once I read the Enneagram, everything changed. It actually felt like a spiritual experience, because I had also kind of come away from the Catholic religion of my youth. And when I read my Enneagram description of me as a 2, it felt very powerful, so accurate, so precise. It helped me understand immediately myself and my patterns, but also, even more important, it highlighted things about myself that I didn't really want to admit about myself, that I didn't really want to see. What we sometimes call the ouch factor or the ick factor. But very quickly, it helped me embrace these things. For instance, it said that 2s can be manipulative. And of course, that didn't sound good, but very quickly I came to see how that could be true. So I got really into the Enneagram through Dr. Daniels, and I went through their training program in 1996 and 97. I got certified by them, and it was so powerful. It helped me get into my own therapy. It helped me understand myself in my own therapy. And in my own therapy, I actually, focusing so much on the Enneagram, decided to go back to school to become a psychotherapist, because I wanted to do something using the Enneagram. So I knew the Enneagram before I studied psychology to become a psychotherapist. And when I studied psychology, it was almost like I could see how the Enneagram operated as a grand theory of psychology. Different approaches to psychotherapy can fit into the different elements of the Enneagram, but the Enneagram really gives us the biggest picture. So I've worked as a psychotherapist for 20 years. I also have done a lot of leadership development and team development, because I studied that also at Stanford Business School. I became a group facilitator at Stanford's Graduate School of Business, and as part of my training. And so I've been sort of doing both for a long time, although I'm not actively doing psychotherapy anymore, because I spend most of my time teaching through the Enneagram school that Uranio and I started. So back to the subtypes. So in the narrative training, we learned about subtypes. And in the early years, from when I learned the Enneagram in 1990 until 2004, of course, I heard about subtypes. There were subtypes teachings, but I really never liked the subtypes in the way I learned them originally. I thought they were sort of vague. I thought different teachers taught them differently. I didn't really see how they helped me. I couldn't really find my subtype. Couldn't really tell if I was self-preservation, social, or sexual. I knew I was a 2, that was clear. But I even started to get a little irritated. It was a little bit like an emperor has no clothes feeling. Like, why are they teaching about the subtypes when there's nothing really there? It's just so thin. It doesn't really do much. And I have no idea what it means. So I would even, like at conferences, when they would do something on subtypes, I would sneak out and get a coffee instead of hanging around in there. That's the level at which I found it sort of just not really very interesting. But all that changed in 2004 when Claudio Naranjo, who in my view, so I started off as an academic. I have a PhD in communication. So before I went back to school in psychology, I studied mass media and politics as an academic. So I think as an academic still. So when I started studying the Enneagram, I wanted to know what's the seminal work, what's the deeper work. And I do have an ongoing project to connect the modern day Enneagram to its ancient roots, going back through ancient Egypt and even before. And I've done some work on that. But in the modern era, we know that it came through Oscar Ichazo, and then Claudio Naranjo, who is a Chilean-born, American-trained psychiatrist, really brought it from Oscar Ichazo. And Oscar, the way he taught it, quite different than the Enneagram we know today, although definitely the source of what Claudio drew on. But Claudio brought it to Berkeley in the US, where he was living, and he really aligned it with Western psychology more. But also, some of you may know a little bit of the history of the Enneagram community. Claudio became a bit alienated, and I think it was a mutual alienation from the Enneagram-based International Enneagram community. And really, although he kind of got the ball rolling in the 70s and 80s, where it was really his work that leaked out, where, like, you know, Helen Palmer wrote the first book, Don Riso and Russ Hudson, their first books. Their books were written based on Claudio's work that leaked out from some of his early teaching. And so they started teaching the Enneagram. I mean, they started writing about it as they learned it, which is very good. So, you know, I think their work is wonderful, especially at popularizing and helping people understand the types. But I don't think very much of Claudio's work about the subtypes had gotten out before, when people started writing the books. And I think they started just sort of trying to put some pieces together, but they didn't really have all the deeper understanding of the subtypes when they wrote the initial books. So in 2003 and 2004, the IEA, the International Enneagram Association, kind of invited him back into the international community. He had been mostly teaching in South America, Central America, and Europe, doing his retreats and things like that. And but he'd sort of been separated from the US-based Enneagram community. And I think at that time, 80s, 90s, and after, a lot of the international community really followed the US-based teachers. But I, of course, looking for the seminal author, really read a lot of Claudio Naranjo's work. And to me, he's really the seminal. His work, the way he talks about the types, it's just much deeper. And I think part of me being a psychotherapist and the way he talks about them psychologically was always a little more appealing. In fact, one of the reasons I was moved to write my first book, The Complete Enneagram, was, and this is sort of a secret, one was to bring his subtypes to a larger community, but the other was to bring people back to his work as central. Now, again, this is not to criticize any of other authors. They're excellent, but his work goes deeper. And I'll give you an example. Sometimes I get frustrated with the way a lot of teachers talk about type 2, my type. Even really good teachers, they'll talk, oh, they're helpers, they're givers. You know, it's sort of this altruistic giving. No. And the way Claudio Naranjo talks about type 2 is completely different. And if you haven't heard him talk about it, it's really very different. He talks about how 2s they give strategically, and he talks more about the dark side. And even though it's hard to hear when I hear him talk about that, something in me goes, yes, like this is what we really need to be talking about. This is the deeper message, because the Enneagram isn't about, as you all know, about making us feel better about ourselves. It's about helping us confront the ego, right? That's what it's really all about. And I think Naranjo brings a little bit more of that energy too. So in 2004, we invited him to the International Enneagram Association conference, which was in Washington, D.C. that year. And he brought 15 of his assistants from, that he worked with. And over 3 mornings of the conference, he taught his version of the subtypes. And for me, that was a revolution in my self-understanding, So it was a big deal. It blew my mind in 1990 when I learned I was a 2. But in 2004, his team told me that they thought I was a self-preservation 2. And I had no idea what that meant at the time, although I had heard him talk about it the day before. So the first day of the conference, he talked about all 27. And then the next day, he helped us find our type. But when he talked about self-preservation 2, he said that self-preservation 2 is childlike. And I had never heard that before in the first 14 years. So I just want to say it's a whole deeper level that he brings. Now I know some of you know this, right? So one of the things I want to really aim to do in this talk in our time together is make sure that I'm speaking to what would be most valuable for you. Because I know some of you are veterans. I know some of you have been studying the Enneagram for a very long time and you know it super well and you've been using it as practitioners in really great ways. So I do have slides. They're sort of extensive, but I'm wanting to maybe focus a little more on the growth path of the types. Maybe that's a good way to go at it, but also leave time for questions. So I want to say a little bit more by way of introduction. So about that 2004 conference, and then maybe Ingrid, you can help me sort of figure out what the right pitch is to make this the most valuable for people. So in 2004, at the first day, he talked about all 27 types. And he was saying things I had never heard before about the subtypes, the 27 subtypes. And when they came over to me, they said, "We think you're a self-preservation 2." And I had never, ever considered that I was self-preservation dominant. And I didn't know what a self-preservation 2 was, but what I'd heard him say was it's a 2 that's more childlike. It seduces like a child in the presence of grown-ups, and that it's a more fearful 2, a more mistrusting 2, a 2 that's more ambivalent about relationship and wants to move toward people, but also moves away from people. And it was amazing because when he said all these things for the first time, I realized that these things were all really, really true for me. And I had not been in touch with how much fear that I had, that I was living from a lot of fear that I was completely not in touch with until I read about this subtype. And so when I want to say the moment that I realized this, so they told me you're the guy, one of Claudio's assistants said, "We think you're a self-preservation 2." And I said, well, I felt myself getting defensive. Like, I'm not childlike. I'm not fearful. That's not sexy. But then I said, well, I lowered my defenses and I said, well, why do you think that? Like, what makes you think that? And it was amazing what he did. He stood next to me and he said, when I stand next to you like this, I do not think you're going to protect me. I think I need to protect you. And it was amazing because my head wanted to fight with him, wanted to say that's not true, but it was as if everything in my body and my heart felt the truth of that in that moment. And for the first time ever, I felt like, whoa, like I'm not someone to protect other people. I do need protection. And I haven't been aware of that. I haven't been aware of how fearful and anxious I really am about connection in a very primal way. So I went to the little group of self-preservation 2s, and we were supposed to talk about what that was like. Of course, we didn't know, but Naranjo's helpers came over and helped us. And they said, well, what about trust? Do you trust people? And it was interesting. I thought, about 5 years ago, if you had asked me that, I would have said, oh, yeah, I trust people because I wanted the image of someone who was trusting. Because I think someone who's good at relationships, which as a 2, I wanted that image. I wanted to seem trusting, and I probably wouldn't have thought about it very deeply. But at that moment in time, I thought about it much more deeply, and I realized I trusted nobody. Nobody. I thought about my best friend in the whole world, who's a self-preservation 5, and she's such a good friend, and she's so trustworthy. And I thought, I don't even trust her. And so it was this huge revelation at this whole deeper level. I sometimes say it was as if I was living in a house and I discovered there was a basement that I didn't know about. This whole deeper level of inner work that I needed to do. And so after that, I mean, I'd been working on the type 2 stuff and making progress, but what I realized after that, that conference was a big part of my inner work was about growing up. There were a lot of ways I was keeping myself a child. And of course, the psychological, and this is what I love about Naranjo, he looks at the psychological motivation and where these things come from. It was a little bit like as a self-preservation too, you know, twos have this experience in childhood of not getting taken care of, like not having their needs met, and so not feeling loved. Twos are the prototype for all 9 types of not getting the love we need. And so kind of searching for it in all the wrong ways from thereafter. But I realized that because my needs hadn't gotten met, and there was a little bit of a way I was sort of staying a child kind of stubbornly, like, well, if my parents didn't meet my needs, I'm not going to take care of my needs. I'm not going to grow up because that makes it okay that they didn't take care of my needs. Like I'm still waiting. I'm still stubbornly waiting for someone to come meet my needs, for me to get the love that I need. And one of the things that Naranjo pointed out, which I thought was especially touching for me, is sometimes we get we can be a little bit, we can lose the tenderness that Ingrid talked about at the beginning and say that like twos are entitled and things like that, like the giving to get, which is definitely true. But what he said was that staying a child is a self-pres too. It's like babies, little children. He said everyone loves babies and little children, and it gets worse from there as you grow up. And he said babies and children deserve to be loved as for who they really are, right? So there's something really core to that two love need of like, every baby deserves to get loved. Every baby, every child deserves to be made special. But of course, we grow up in a human world, and that doesn't always happen. Okay, so I want to do some definitions, and maybe I'll use the slides. But Ingrid, I'm right in assuming that this is a very experienced group, right? So I don't necessarily, but I'm not sure. I mean, I do want to describe the subtypes, but maybe I'll describe them sort of more quickly, but then go to the growth path a little more. Does that make sense?
I think the audience is very mixed. So we've got people that come out of IQ9 and join the space, and they've had that training, but not the background psychodynamics of the instincts as the primary driver and how they filter through the type.
Got it.
So I would say actually from the ground up
Okay.
would actually be more helpful. And
Okay.
then people can hook other stuff onto that.
Okay, great. All right. So what I'll do then is I'll do the full presentation, again, moving through it so that we have time for you to ask questions, because I really want to make space for questions. So I'm going to aim to go for about an hour or a little less if I can manage it, and then take your questions, because I do want to speak to what people want to know. Okay, so I will share my screen. And if that makes sense. Okay. So we're really talking about the subtypes, but as Deborah mentioned in her introduction, the instincts are also really important. So I want to start by defining instinct and subtype, because I think there's a lot of confusion in the Enneagram community about what's an instinct and what's a subtype. So I'll start with that. But really, I'll talk about the 3 instincts, that some of the traits of the 3 subtypes for each of the 9 types, and the growth paths. So starting with instinct, instinct is the biological animal part of us, right? We are animals, and the instinct is the animal wisdom in us, right? So it's part of personality though, because we are animals, right? So we have a head that thinks, we have a heart that it has emotions, but then the instincts are based in our body. Instinctual intelligence is in the body. And of course, it's connected to the instinctual brain, the reptilian brain. But these are biological imperatives, survival drives, animal wisdom, and in that they are good, right? So our instincts aren't bad. Sometimes it's like we do need to rise above the merely animal in us, but our instincts bring wisdom. They help us survive. But the problem is when they get kind of tied up in the personality, they get distorted. So that's the main issue. So our instincts express animal intelligence. They're based in the body center. They're very fast. Instinctual, we sometimes say that if a thought moves at the speed of X, an emotion moves at the speed of 10X, 10 times X, and an instinctual impulse moves at the speed of 100X. So very quick. And again, we're wired for survival, we humans. And when we're healthy, our instincts get activated as needed, right? If you're being chased by a lion, it makes sense that your self-preservation instinct would come online to help you run away, right? A little more likely in South Africa than other places. But if nothing is happening to threaten your life right now, your self-preservation instinct maybe shouldn't be firing off. And yet the problem is when our instincts get embedded in our personality, they fire off all the time. So for me as a self-preservation dominant person, I'm always worrying about what I'm going to have for dinner, and I think about it way too much. And the truth is, I have no chance of starving. My life is not at threat. But deeper down within self-preservation dominance and within the self-preservation instinct, there is this sort of fear of death component. So it's very, very important. So when we're identified with our personality, the activity of the instincts gets sort of mixed up with the passions, which is the central emotional factor in us, and also our head patterns, our beliefs, our ways of thinking. So ego formation includes the distortion of the instincts. So there's two kinds of distortions. They either fire off much more than necessary, that's your dominant instinct, or they get repressed. They fire off much less than necessary. So Uranio and I teach that we have a sequence of instincts. We all have all three of the instincts, just like we all have all three centers of intelligence. But according to our type, we come more from one center of intelligence than the other two. I'm a heart type, so I overuse the heart center. I underuse the body and head center. I'm out of balance that way. And part of my work is balancing the centers. But then Uranio just came in the room. I'll get him to say hi if he comes back. But then our instincts also get distorted by the passion of our type, right? And I will talk about that more of that later. But we do have a sequence. So we have all three instincts for self-preservation, social survival through the social instinct, and survival through the sexual instinct. But one becomes dominant. One takes up more space. One takes up all the space in our consciousness. It focuses our attention on certain things and not on others. But then one of these gets repressed. And then one of them sort of in the middle. It's sort of more normal, but I say it's not really normal because that middle one can be somewhat repressed or overdone. But the middle one is easier to change to bring into a kind of healthy status. So the dominant instinct happens when the instinct is firing off all the time. If you're a social dominant, your social instinct is like directing a lot of what you do, whether you're aware of it or not. If you're sexual dominant, your sexual instinct has a big role to play in what you focus on and how you interact with people. But again, a lot of times in ways that tend to remain pretty unconscious. And so one way the instincts impact us is just directly, right, through these instinctual drives, being either too much or too little, right? So when they are, and we say that they're repressed more than being a blind spot because these are energies, right? And in order for them to stay out of consciousness, it's almost like unconsciously we have to push them out of our awareness because their being there threatens us. So it's sort of like we give up on one of the instincts. It doesn't even play a role in our on our view screen, and one of the instincts gets way overdone. That's the dominant, right? So then the other way that the instinct influences us is through our subtype patterns, right? So we have an instinctual sequence, dominant, secondary, and repressed, but then our dominant instinct mixes up with the passion of our type. And probably all of you know the passion is the central emotional motivator. When Uranio and I do the deep inner work retreats we work a lot with the passion because it's sort of like the core of suffering, the core of the personality. It's kind of like the emotional engine that keeps everything going. But when we become more conscious of it, it gives us a lot of leverage to be more conscious generally. But the instinct and the passion, and this was what Claudio Naranjo said, the instinct and the passion, and they kind of mix up in an alchemical mix and yield subtype patterns, right? And this is what I thought was sort of weak tea in my first 14 years of studying the Enneagram. because the subtypes, what I think they did is they added instinct and passion. So it's sort of like, well, I'm a one and I do all my one things and I'm driven to some degree by repressed anger, which is the passion. And I like to join groups. So I must be a social one. It was a little bit like addition. But what Claudio does is more of an alchemical mixture of the dominant instinct and the passion to yield a much more sophisticated, nuanced, detailed, thorough description of subtype patterns that are amazingly accurate, just as accurate as the type patterns that if you've learned your type and thought it was amazing. So he talked about the instinct and passion being an alchemical mixture. For instance, the example he gave that I thought was really great. So for type 6, the passion is fear. He said, when you have a self-preservation dominant 6, you mix up the self-preservation instinct with the passion of fear. He said you get a particular kind of person who acts out particular patterns that are based on a kind of separation anxiety. And the self-preservation 6 acts out fear in a way that's very different, acts from fear and acts out fear in a way that's, and attempts to cope with fear in a way that's very different than the social 6 or the sexual 6. It's a kind of, it's like a person who's a warm person who looks almost two-ish, because it's like, if I'm warm and friendly with people, I'll invite protectors and people won't attack me. Right. So even though they can look like a 2 on the outside, they're very mental on the inside. So fear alchemically mixed up with self-preservation dominant yields this subtype. And for me, Claudio's brilliance is describing these subtype patterns in a way I had never heard before, in a way that's like interconnected and thorough and makes so much more sense. And when I started teaching his version of the subtypes, people everywhere I went, people would say, "Oh my, we should never learn the Enneagram without this. This adds so much nuance and depth." So the subtype results from both the dominant instinct and the emotional energy, the lower emotion, the lower heart, right? So the passion of the type, in the form of the passion and the type and the emotional patterns that are also to some degree or conditioned in childhood and oriented towards survival. Right. And so people who don't know the Naranjo version and make many typing mistakes. And by the way, if you have been trained in the IAQ, Dirk and Lucille, when they created it in the beginning, incorporated the Naranjo subtypes. Now, of course, theirs is more about the test and the report, so they don't go into depth into the subtypes. But the good news is they've embedded that version in their test, which I think is great. Okay, so a little bit about the instincts themselves, but we need to be careful because we can't say too much about the instincts that apply to all 9 types, because the way the instincts will get expressed is both directly, like I can talk about my self-preservation instinct and the way it operates in me as a 2, but then my self-preservation instinct is also going to operate through me, through my subtype. So we need to remember that instinct refers to these 3 things, right? Self-preservation, social, and sexual. And the subtype refers to the 27, right? When 3 times 9 is 27. So there are 3 versions of each of the 9 types, according to which instinct is dominant, and that yields 27. So there's a confusion in the international community because when Don Riso and Russ Hudson wrote The Wisdom of the Enneagram, and it came out in 1999, one of them, still probably today, one of the most popular books about the Enneagram, and a very good book. But they did something that, as an academic, I don't like, because they changed things. What did they change? They changed things from what Naranjo was saying. They called wings subtypes, and they called what I'm calling subtypes, instinctual subtypes, they called them instinctual variants, right? And this created a lot of confusion. Why? I believe wings are not subtypes. Wings are wings, right? They flavor our main type, but they're different for everybody, right? I'm a 2. I have a lot of 1 in me. I had a 1 father and a 1 brother growing up, so I have a lot of 1 in me. But my 1, if Deborah Williams is a sexual 2, she has some 1 in her. The way her 1 plays out might be really different than the way my 1 plays out. Wings are not subtypes. They do color our main type. For Uranio and I, wings are mainly growth paths. They're growth pathways at the more beginning of the journey. And we have a levels of awareness model. So part of what we use is that model in terms of different growth tasks to be done along the way, along the path, different growth tasks in the beginning than you do later on in the path. And we think wing stretches are good growth stretches in the beginning of the journey, right? Arrow line movements a little bit later, and we work a lot with the arrows. But what we're talking about here is the fact that wings are not subtypes, but because Russ and Don called them subtypes, they needed to call the subtypes something else, and they called them instinctual variants. So a lot of Riso Hudson people still call them instinctual variants. But then what happened is they shortened that to instinct. So sometimes a Riso Hudson trained person is talking about the 27 subtypes, but they're referring to them as instincts. So I'm just saying it creates a lot of confusion. So I'm defining these terms so we can hopefully get out of the confusion. So the instincts are these three drives, right? One, and again, in the Enneagram model, there's one that aims for self-preservation, one that's about the social, like getting along with the tribe, and one that's about the sexual. So this self-preservation is simply about self-preservation. Dominants are all about safety, security, having enough resources, avoiding danger, maintaining a sense of structure and being in the world. How am I going to be grounded? I'm a self-pres dominant. Uranio is a social dominant, my business partner. I'm the one that creates the outlines for our courses. I'm the one that insists on having an order of things and a plan. He'd rather not have a plan. He'd rather sort of free flow and go with the flow. And he's good at that. But I like to have a plan, right? And so even though he's the 5 and I'm the 2, I'm the one who provides the outlines. So then the social instinct, really important. This is like that. It goes back to the times when we didn't survive without a tribe, right? So this is paying attention to the collective. And where am I in relation to the collective? I'm going to help the group survive. In what way? And what role do I play? And so social dominants sometimes have a God complex or a savior complex because it's a little bit like, I'm here to help everybody. I'm here to save the group. I'm here to save the day. And they have a focus on like, am I recognized? So sometimes they have a little more pride, a little more arrogance because they want to be the ones telling everyone how it is. And so it's about how am I positioned and regarded, and about how can I help us all survive in terms of what I do through my type. And then the sexual instinct is focus very much strongly on one-to-one bonding, the achievement and maintenance of important relationships. And for the sexual dominant, it can be like the other is everything. So focusing all their attention, and it can be a partner, but it can also be other people. And they can have an almost umbilical connection and an urge to merge. And so it's a lot about sort of really deep bonding in service of survival. But again, we need to be very careful because it's going to look a little bit different for each of the 9 types, right? So to summarize, we have 9 types and 9 passions. One of the 3 instincts dominates our experience, and a person's passion then mixes up with their dominant instinct to create a subtype, which is a totally different sub-personality. So if you have 3 4s, for instance, the 3 subtypes of 4s, 4s and 6s are the 2 types where they look the most different from one another. Right? So if you're a coach, you can't just know how to work with a 4. You've got to know how to work with a self-preservation 4. And now that's completely different than if you're working with a social 4. And then it's completely different again when you're working with a sexual 4. And so it's really important to know that the passion gets mixed up with the instinct and interferes with the healthy flowing of our animal wisdom. And so the important thing is not to get rid of our instincts. It's to get the distortions out of the way. It's to understand how they operate in a way that doesn't serve us, that actually holds us back. So it's really important to know the subtypes because they help with typing. It's the best explanation by far of why 2 people of the same type are different. And this is why I think Riso and Hudson and others may have emphasized wings in the early era, is because they were trying to figure out how do we describe why 2 3s are different or why 2 5s are different. Well, maybe it's because 1 3 has a 2 wing and 1 3 has a 4 wing. And I think that makes sense that you would try to go to that. But I think instinctual subtypes are much, 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 much better, accurate, deep, detailed descriptions of how the types differ from one another. And you really need to know your subtype in order to know your growth path, because each of the 27 has a specific path of development. Now, I want to say one thing about countertype, because this is something that Claudio talked about in his part as part of his approach that I'd never heard of before. And that is, he says all 9 types have what he calls a countertype. Now, some of you may have heard of the counterphobic 6, right? That's the countertype of type 6, right? It's a 6 that goes against fear with strength, right? So what Claudio said is the 6 isn't the only type that has a countertype, that has a type that goes completely against the passion. Sexual 6, and in this approach, the sexual 6 is the counterphobic 6, is the countertype, right? In the narrative tradition, they still teach that you can be counterphobic and be a self-preservation 6, or you can be phobic and be a sexual 6. In this approach, no. The self-preservation 6 is the phobic 6, and the sexual 6 is the counterphobic 6, and the social is kind of a mix in the middle. And of course, any 6 will tell you there's almost no such thing as 100% counterphobic and 100% phobic. Every counterphobic 6 has some phobic moments, and phobic 6 has some counterphobic moments. But if it's a spectrum, the sexual 6 is the counterphobic 6, and the self-preservation 6 is the phobic, fearful 6, right? The flight 6, right? And what Claudio said that was completely earth-shattering to me at that conference in 2004 is every type has a countertype, meaning for each of the 9 types, there are 2 that kind of go with the flow of the passion, and there's one that kind of goes against it. It's as if the heart is going in one direction, the heart energy, and the body, the instinct energy, is going in a different direction. And so they go against each other. And it's important to know, because sometimes the countertype doesn't look like that type, right? Like sometimes, like one of the big things that helped people when I started teaching this was a lot of 3s, self-preservation 3s, didn't type themselves as 3s because they didn't relate to a lot of the description of type 3, which was a lot about the social subtype, not all 3 3s. Right. And so my mind was blown when I heard about these 3 3s, that there's not just a social 3, but a lot of the books talk about just the social 3. But the self-preservation 3 is a 3 that has vanity for going against vanity, for not wanting to be vain, right? So the self-preservation 3 is someone who doesn't want to brag or promote themselves. They're more humble. They kind of want to be modest. They want to work hard and put their head down and be good people. They look a lot like 1s, right? And so they're the countertype. And knowing about countertypes helps a lot with typing, and it helps us understand a lot why some types look so different, like the 4, the self-preservation 4, which I almost dedicated the Complete Enneagram to the self-preservation 4s, because that, of all 27 subtypes, that subtype was to me the biggest revelation of Naranjo's approach, because I had never heard of a self-preservation 4 before. It's a very interesting type, and they have to work on something that's completely different than anything that gets talked about with the other 4s. So countertype is really important, and I'll be highlighting that as I go along. Okay, so each of the subtypes has its own growth path. So that's the number one reason really to understand the subtypes. And like I said, when Uranio and I do really deep work with people, a lot of times we'll be focusing on subtype patterns, because that's the leverage point. That's the issue. And I'll be highlighting that as we go. So I have a lot of words in these slides and not a lot of time, so I'm going to try to go a little bit quickly through them. So do write down any questions you have that I'm going to try to leave time for at least 20 minutes to take your questions. So one of the ways we think about the subtypes is the passion of type 8, which is lust, gets expressed in 3 different ways. For the self-preservation, it's like I focus on what's needed to survive in a direct, powerful way. Self-preservation 8s don't need to talk a lot. They don't need to have power over people. They're more contained. They're more 5-ish. And they don't need to, be big over in terms of having power over people. It's more about getting what they need. It's more about material security. For the social, lust gets channeled into protecting others. And for the sexual, it gets channeled into power and having control over, and magnetizing everybody's attention to whatever you're doing and whatever you want to do. So the self-preservation 8 is called satisfaction. It's focusing on getting what is needed to survive in a direct search for satisfaction, like what's the shortest route from A to B to get what I need? They don't need to explain themselves to you. They don't need to talk about it. They don't communicate very much. It's just sort of like, how do I get my needs met? And they're very good at it. But they may have like more fear around security than you would think of for an 8, like someone who checks their bank account a lot, someone who's worried about having enough money for retirement, but also someone who's a little bit more private and self-contained and can look a bit 5-ish. So the social 8 is called solidarity. And this is the counter type because it's a social, antisocial 8, right? It's an 8. So all 8s are in a way antisocial because they go against convention. They go against the rules. They're not afraid to say, I do it differently. They're not afraid to stand up to authority, right? And the social 8 is still like that, but the social 8 also focuses a lot on protecting other people, on being a mentor to others, on supporting others. Naranjo said some brilliant things, and again, this is what I mean when I say he comes from a deeper psychological place and also a spiritual place. But what he said about social 8s really blew my mind. He said the social 8 is the archetype of the child who became violent in protecting the mother from the father. And I can't tell you how many stories I've heard of social 8s who had like a violent father and had to literally, they were the kid and they had to protect the siblings and maybe their mother from their father. So it's a little bit like I go against the patriarchy to protect those, and this is archetypally, of course, protect those who have less strength and less ability to protect themselves. So oftentimes you see social 8s being really into protecting women or children or battered women, people who've been abused, things like this. And it's often an 8 that doesn't look like an 8, especially in women, and they can look a lot like 2s, sometimes like 9s. So then the sexual 8, and again, I'm going to describe all 3 and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the growth path. There's a focus on rebellion, a focus on intensity. They're out in front saying, I do things differently. I don't have to follow what you say, but they want to possess everyone's attention. So it's not just possessing the partner. It's like, they're magnetic, they're charismatic. This is the 8 that has the most colors in their feathers. It's a very passionate 8. So someone who's more emotional, actually, you're more likely to see this 8 cry, but it's not necessarily a vulnerability cry. It's more of a cry from passion, of feeling passionately about things. And it's a lot of emotion and a lot of action, but not as much thinking. And then the growth path for the 8, the self-preservation 8, is observing and making security needs conscious, learning to tolerate frustration because they can be very impatient, and developing the ability to ask for help, right? It's more about I go for what I need. I'm really good at getting what I want or creating material security, but I don't want to do the vulnerability thing where I ask other people for help. They don't share their feelings as much. They're the most armored and they need to put down the armor. And then the social 8 needs to focus on getting protection, not only giving protection, right? Focus doing inner child work, becoming more conscious of their need for protection. Often social 8s work themselves so hard to take care of everybody else and don't get taken care of themselves. And it's really hard for them to open up to receive love and care from others. And that's super important. And then the sexual 8 needs to observe that desire to possess everyone's intention and to control everything. And they'll say they want to control because they care, but at the same time, that sexual instinct combined with lust is a lot about I know how everything needs to happen for people, and I express my caring and my love through wanting everyone to do what I say and listen to me and pay attention to me. A lot of emotional intensity and consciousness. I've started to do a little bit of work with Tony Robbins. Some of you may know him. He's internationally known, and he's amazing. I've come to know him better, his work better, and I think he's amazing. And he's a great example of a sexual 8, and he really cares. Okay, so type 9, the passion of sloth gets expressed in 3 different ways, right? So either and again, sloth is about losing awareness of your own needs, of your own being, of your own self as a 9. So each of these 3 subtypes focuses on something other than themselves, right? Sloth focuses them on something other and focuses on something other than their own sense of being. So either as a self-preservation, they fuse with their own body or physical comforts or routines, or they fuse with the group, or they fuse with another person. So the self-preservation 9 is called appetite, and they find a kind of, and self-preservation 9s are all about comfort. It's about comfort. And to grow, they need to get out of comfort. They need to get uncomfortable. So appetite isn't just about eating. It's about all kinds of comfort. And, but it's comfort as a way of being resigned to being comfortable as opposed to getting the love you need, getting the support you need, doing things on your own behalf. So they're more concrete, they're a bit more 8-ish, a little more stubborn and hard to move. And they also like being alone a little bit more than the other 2 9s. So they're a little more loners, a little more in that stubbornness. Okay, so social 9 is the counter type. It's called participation. I use this because I think Obama was a social 9. And I like this economist because they're sort of criticizing him for not putting the boxing gloves on and being stronger, being more of a mediator, letting other people set the agenda, right? So it's the counter type because social 9s are super active in the world, right? The social 9 is, they express sloth actually through getting super active, almost losing themselves and working hard to support others. And they don't show their stress, but they work super hard to belong for the group, because of a deeper sense of wanting to belong to the group and this deep sense and deep sadness about feeling a sense of not belonging. And it's kind of like, if I work really hard and I'm really unselfish, finally I'll belong. But of course, I want to make this point here as I'm remembering it. The subtype patterns drive us in circles in that they express kind of driving needs that are insatiable and can never be satisfied. Right. So as much as a social 9 can work themselves, and by the way, they're the biggest workaholics after 3s. They don't show their stress. They don't complain. They're very unselfish, very congenial, good mediators, good leaders, because they're very humble, but they don't complain. And they always feel sad inside. And no matter how hard they work, they feel like they don't belong. And they often get confused with 2s or 3s. So the sexual 9 is the one of all 27 that merges the most, because the sexual instinct merges and type 9 merges. And when you put both of those together, you get people that really merge with the other person, and they may have no idea how much they've merged with someone important to them. So they unconsciously blend with the other person and almost gain a sense of purpose or a sense of living, attitudes, opinions, feelings based on that other person they're fused with, and they may not know. It's a sense of no boundaries with the other person. And sometimes if the relationship with that important other person isn't going well, it can take forever for the sexual 9 to disengage because they get so merged, and it's hard for them to sort of tease apart their own sense of self and their own sense of, like, let's say, not being treated well, right? And being separated. I once heard a sexual 9 say that he when he needed to break up with someone, he couldn't do it, so he would move to a different city, and he would only tell the person after he had moved, because it was so hard to actually break up with someone, even if he was unhappy in the relationship, right? And they can look like 4s or heart types because they're sensitive to push-pull dynamics in relationship, but it's not exactly emotion, it's more instinct. It's more an instinctual bonding. So then the growth paths for the self-preservation self-preservation 9. So for the 9, this 9 is about getting in touch with anger and power inside as a way of, and it's going to be uncomfortable, leaning into discomfort, noticing what gets in the way of taking action on their own behalf, coming to live more, like not getting so distracted by routines and comfortable things, crossword puzzles, watching TV, like stopping doing that and moving into life more, being more with people, leaning into whatever is uncomfortable, expressing more anger and power. And really, really, it's a lot about working against comfort and getting lost in comfort. For the social 9, it's getting more in touch with the sadness of not belonging, It's about observing and their anger and your power, and using your power and your anger on your own behalf. Social nines need to become disruptors in the groups they're in, not just good mediators. And joining the group more consciously and taking in other people's appreciation for the work they do, and sometimes working less and not working so much for others, but also on their own behalf. So for the sexual nine, getting more aware of how much you merge and separating out. We just did a retreat here in London, these 5 days, a more advanced spiritual retreat. And we had this beautiful sexual nine man who he's so incredible because he expresses the energy that he feels, and the way, and we had him do a cut between him and his ex-wife because they can separate or divorce, but they're still connected umbilically to that person they've separated from. We had him do another big cut. And at first he felt really scared, but then he felt completely different after he had made that umbilical cut. So allowing for separation, this means physical separation, spending more time by yourself and focusing more on yourself, period. So type 1, the passion of anger, gets expressed in 3 different ways. And social ones, self-preservation ones, are really the true perfectionists. Social ones are perfect, and sexual ones are perfect other people, right? So this perfection thing goes 3 different ways. It's experienced 3 different ways. When I started teaching this, a lot of ones came up to me and were saying, thank you for saying not all ones are perfectionists. It's only really the self-preservation one. Although the other 2 ones can have some perfectionistic tendencies, they're not like focused on perfecting every little thing. That's the self-preservation ones. And I'll describe what that means here. So self-preservation one is called worry. And in addition to having a lot of repressed anger that they need to work on, they also have a lot of anxiety they need to work on. They need to work on being less worried, being more carefree, relaxing more. But these are the true perfectionists. And that's because often early in childhood, they had to be responsible for other people in the family, for creating stability in the family, even when they were like as young as 4 or 5 years old. They sort of felt like, ooh, it's on me to create more stability in this chaotic family system. So there's almost a survival fear, is if I don't do everything right, not only will things go bad for me, but they'll go bad for everybody. So there's a lot of focus on controlling every little detail. They tend to be much more self-critical than critical of others. The sexual one is more critical of others than they are of themselves. So notice how these things change with the subtypes, and they repress anger the most, to where the heat of anger gets translated, or through reaction formation, the defense mechanism gets translated into warmth and friendliness. So this is a very warm, friendly person. And they can look a little bit like 2s, and they can look like self-preservation 6s because they have more anxiety, but they need to relax, but I'll say that more in a minute. Social one is rigidity or non-adaptability. They're perfect in that they focus on knowing the right thing, the right way to do something, and then perfecting, demonstrating that for others. It's like a teacher mentality or being a good role model. My brother is a social one, and he is a conductor, right? He's not in the group. Now, social ones don't like to be in the group with everybody else. They have this need, unconscious often, to be superior. Now, again, they won't say that because ones don't want to be superior. They don't want to say that because that's not very nice, but they have this drive to be outside and above the group in order to teach the group how to survive, how to do things the right way. So my brother it's such a great example of that, literally outside the group, keeping the tempo for the orchestra. And so he also liked to do a lot of research to find out the right way, and then he does it that way, and less anxious than the self-preservation one because it's like, I can relax once I know the perfect way to do it. And they're more intellectual, so they look like 5s. And it's also like anger expressed as being the owner of the truth or the owner of the right way. So the sexual one is the counter type because it's the one of the 3 ones that doesn't repress anger as much, right? They still do a little bit. They're still over controlling anger, but this is a one that thinks it's not bad to be angry. And they use that angry energy to perfect other people, to reform others. A lot of times you see sexual ones as preachers or ministers or pastors, perfecting other people, being the one who tells other people how they should be, reformers. And they're the most openly angry. And it's as if anger potentiates desire. They also go for what they need and want the most, a bit zealous, right? So these are the ones that can look a little bit like 8s, a little bit more openly angry, fixing everything out there, fixing the partner, telling everyone how they should be, and also reforming society. So the self-preservation one needs to observe and understand their anxiety and where it comes from and a survival fear. Notice and be less hard on themselves because they're super self-critical. Try to let go of control, be easier, have more fun, relax more, and feel into the natural rhythms of life rather than trying to control things. I like this quote for this. Nature doesn't hurry, and yet everything is accomplished. And it's like being as serene and relaxed as this lake. The social one, it's about knowing how being perfect separates you from others and makes you want to be superior and tell other people how to do it. And observing how anger gets channeled into being the owner of the truth, and explore deeper motives about why you don't adapt to others and why you need to be right, and learning to adapt more to others and not need to be the one that's always coming with the right way or always in role model mode, like being wrong sometimes. Okay, so the sexual one growth path then is channeling the anger, right? It's tricky with ones because it's not just about sort of reducing the passion. First, they need to get in touch with it in a more conscious way and not just repress it, go against it, make themselves bad for being angry, but recognizing it's not always your job to criticize others. You also need to own your own part. Sometimes sexual ones sort of see how everybody else is wrong, but not themselves. And channel that anger more consciously, observing where zeal comes from, and noticing how personal desires can get mixed up with a higher mission. Sexual ones can feel like they're on a mission from God, and then sort of play God a bit in the way they do that. So 2s, the passion here is pride. It gets expressed in 3 different ways. The self-preservation through being charming to attract others' protection and care. Remember, I said it's like seducing like a child in the presence of grown-ups. The social is about seducing groups, right? Through being influential, smart, knowing everything, being competent, being the queen. And for the sexual, it's more the usual seduction that we know, being attractive, using charm and attractiveness as a weapon. You know, you'll never find someone as sexually satisfying as me. You know, being special because I can please you and satisfy you and give you more than anyone else. So privilege is the name of the self-preservation too. So it's, again, I talked about this a little bit more about myself as an example. And this was, like I said, I never saw this before I learned this, but then afterwards I saw it everywhere. So wanting to be charming, fun-loving, but it's also wanting to keep a little distance with people, right? Friendly, but because I always hated it when Enneagram teachers would talk about how 2s like to meet people's needs. I never like to meet people's needs. I do meet people's needs as a way of getting them to like me or love me, but not because I like to, right? When I experience a needy person in my environment, I want to run the other way, right? So it's more like I want to be charming and friendly because I want you to like me, but I don't necessarily want to have to sign on to meeting all your needs indefinitely. So there's more ambivalence about connection, more fear of rejection, but also fear of connection, right? Because the self-preservation instinct, self-preservation dominance can be a little bit more like going on their own, a little bit more fearful of deep connection. And this is a 2 that can look like a 4 or a 6, a little more emotional and a little more fearful. So the social 2 can look like an 8 actually, or a 3. It's a seducer of groups, someone who's powerful, intellectual, competent, a leader type, right? Someone who's not just the power behind the throne, but sometimes the power. More of an adult, someone who wants to seduce audiences, be admired, and someone who's very controlling, but doesn't always own it. So there's a quote I like from Anne Lamott. She says that help is the sunny side of control, right? And I love that quote. And this I think applies a little bit to the social 2. And then there's the sexual 2 that employs a classical method of seduction, the femme fatale archetype, I'm going to be the most attractive person you ever met, more outgoing, wild, flexible, force of nature, When a relationship ends, it's as if I've died. So really, really two-ish with a lot of sexual instinct. Can also look a little bit like a sexual 4. And then the growth path is about observing fear and ambivalence about relationships, noticing unconscious dependencies and how you actually want other people to take care of you. You don't necessarily want other people to take care of everybody else, or you to take care of everyone else, but can be very sensitive, irresponsible, just like a child is likely to be, right? A little more anxious, a little bit more sensitive. And it's hard, they need to step more into their power and authority and not stay a child. And the social 2 growth path is recognizing how pride is doubled here, right? The social instinct can be prideful and the 2 can be prideful. So this is the most prideful of all the types, but of course, 2s don't always want to see the pride, but it's a little bit about how you kind of want you want to take control, you want to give to others as a way of getting seen in a positive light, as a way of other giving you that control. So remember, it's strategic giving, and it's the most strategic with the social 2. It's the most giving to get, and it's the type of all 27 that has the biggest urge to manipulate and control things. Sometimes through friendliness, sometimes through giving, sometimes through being magnanimous. But it's a 2 that likes to speak to big groups, but also can be a little bit more manipulative and controlling of others. And then the sexual 2 needs to focus on how wooing that special other detracts from their own deeper feelings and needs. So it's sort of like if I focus on seducing the other, all my needs will get met in that relationship, instead of really being a little more separate, really understanding, well, how do really needs get met? Maybe you want to find more needs, ways of having your needs met, not just from that special other person. So in type 3, the passion of self-deceit, which is shape-shifting, gets expressed in 3 different ways. So the self-preservation 3 is kind of an efficient, autonomous workaholic, someone who wants to be good, not just look good, right? So this is why the self-preservation 3 looks like a 1. The social 3 expresses self-deceit by wanting to be recognized, by having a really, really good image and selling that image. And the sexual 3 is more of a charismatic pleaser. The sexual 3 is a 3 that looks like a 2, but is very focused on how they look, and on those important relationships and how they look to those important others. Sexual 3s are also all about supporting other people in relationships. So self-preservation 3 is the counter type. And it has vanity for having no vanity. So doesn't like to promote themselves, as I said, wants to be seen as good. So they look 1-ish because they figure out, like, what does the social context define as good? And then I'm going to be that, right? So I'll be the good mother for this, or the good worker in this setting, or the good yoga teacher over here. Whatever setting I'm in, I'm the best role model for that. But I don't try to draw attention to myself. I just try to put my head down, work hard, and provide security for everyone around me, not just myself. The social is called prestige, so it's looking good, getting the job done, knowing how to climb the social ladder, knowing what images people will find just flawless in terms of the image I'm going for. I'm really good at being in tune with the social icons of success. So this is the 3 that I talked about before. That's sort of been presented as the only 3, the one that's the most aggressive, the most competitive. So this is a 3 that achieves in the service of looking good, getting the job done, pursuing recognition. Worth is equated with social achievement and status. And so this is the most well-known 3. The sexual 3 is charisma. So it's interesting. Sexual 3s are charismatic. Not only is it a physical attractiveness, it's sort of like a whole kind of something intangible that's attractive about them. But they are focused on attracting others and appealing in terms of whatever sort of conventional characteristics are thought of as attractive or pleasing. And they're also really enthusiastic cheerleaders for others, like make really good coaches or teachers, people who are all about, like, I succeed when the people I support succeed. So the self-preservation 3 growth path is slowing down and making room for feelings and not just be and feelings and just being, feeling feelings and being. Developing security through relationships and depending on others, not just hard work and virtue, and paying attention to deeper sources of anxiety. The self-preservation 3 tends to be very anxious. The social 3's growth path is about learning to discern the true and the false, right? Not just really identifying because my image is so good. Like, of course, I'm going to identify with that. And developing more honesty, showing more flaws, being more vulnerable in front of people, and making use of failure in a more conscious way instead of avoiding it at all costs. The sexual 3, observing that focus on attracting others. The sexual 3 is, of all 27, the type that's the least in touch with themselves. So getting more in touch with themselves, knowing more who they are from the inside, building self-esteem, building more connections to their own feelings and their own inner experience so that they don't define themselves only by how others experience them. And I like this quote, "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off." So I think that applies for 3s, having to let go of some of what they've thought of as true. So type 4's passion of envy. So gets expressed in 3 distinct ways. The self-preservation 4 is long-suffering, the social 4 suffers, and the sexual 4s make other people suffer. So the self-preservation 4, it used to be called reckless dauntless. Here it's called tenacity. So interesting type. This 4 is long-suffering, stoic. They may feel pain inside or suppress it, but they keep it inside and they kind of put a happy face on the outside, but they carry a big, heavy load. Sometimes they carry the pain for others. Sometimes they don't relate to the envy because they don't really actively compare themselves in terms of better or worse, inferior or superior. It's more like I'm tougher than you, I'm stronger than other people. And so sometimes they don't see the envy as easily. But of course, for the counter types, all the passions are there just as much for the others. They can look a little bit happier on the outside because usually in childhood they got told that they were people didn't want to hear their dark feelings. I don't want to hear about your sadness. I just want you to put a smile on your face. So self-preservation 4s kind of look happy on the outside for others, but inside they hold that back and they tend to be sort of strong and stoic. They pride themselves on being able to endure pain without wincing. And so this is the tenacity of the counter type of self-preservation 4, whereas social 4s suffer. What does that mean? They feel shame, sadness. They focus more on inferiority. They compare themselves to others and wind up on the bottom of the ladder. And they tend to feel things very deeply. They wear their heart on their sleeves, very sensitive. They're sort of more the sad 4. And then the sexual 4, we sometimes call the mad 4, because the sexual 4 leads with anger, right? Makes other people suffer because they feel inside they've been made to suffer and so need compensation. So when instead of feeling their sadness and shame inside, sexual 4s lead with anger. It's as if they're saying, the world doesn't see me as special enough. And so it's envy and its manifestation of competition. I'm going to show that I'm better than you. They're more assertive and angry. And probably a lot of you know Lucille Grief, who I really love. And I'll never forget, she was on a subtype panel early on, and she said the best thing. I don't think she would mind if I repeated it. She said that as a sexual 4 herself, when she went to therapy, she would have to be mad. She would have to be angry for the first 45 minutes of her therapy session so she could get into her sadness and her pain in the last 5 minutes. And I always thought, oh, that's such a beautiful expression. So 4s, it doesn't, some people say that, oh, you're making sexual 4s bad. No, anger is neutral. It's not a bad thing. Some people think anger is bad, but leading with anger is just expressing your feelings in a different direction. They externalize their suffering, and self-preservation 4s internalize it. So the growth path, if I have one thing to say to self-preservation 4s, own the blind spot of masochism. We work with this so much when we do in our retreats, when we work with self-preservation 4s, because it's a real blind spot. Self-preservation 4s are more masochistic. They sort of make things hard on themselves as a way of proving themselves, whereas the other 2 4s are more melodramatic. For the social 4, it's noticing how suffering operates to seduce others into offering support. Notice how you're attached to your suffering and you don't want to let it go. Take action to get what you want instead of over-identifying with envy and inferiority and a deficient sense of self. And then for the sexual four, and I like this for the social fours, the Buddha taught that life is suffering and it's all about the end of suffering, but you have to let it end. And sometimes social fours don't. The sexual four is about observing that tendency to project out suffering to compensate for deeper feelings of lack. Practice being with your own pain that's underneath the anger and not externalizing it. And going through anger and competitiveness to be more in touch with what's underneath that, and notice that rejection and anger can become a cycle, because people don't like angry people. So when the sexual four gets angry, they get rejected, and then they get angry for being rejected, and it becomes cyclical. So fives, passion of avarice, goes in 3 different ways. For the self-preservation 5, it's about maintaining boundaries and protecting privacy. Having a place of refuge to be able to retreat to. For the social 5, it's about becoming an expert. It's all about knowledge, becoming the master of information and knowing everything. And for the sexual 5, it's about seeking that ideal partner and expressing big romantic ideals through finding that one person that I can go deep with. And I'll finally realize my quest for love. So they idealize and romanticize relationships as a way of not having as many. So for self-preservation 5, the title is Castle. And this is about focusing on boundaries and withdrawing to a place of refuge. They don't express as many desires. They get by on less. They live little inside the they want to be inside the castle and have everything they need inside the castle. And many self-preservation 5s they're very into their home and having a private space in their home, or making their home a place they like to be. It's the warmest 5, but it's a 5 that avoids conflict and aggression. The social 5, it's called totem because it's almost like they have a need for super ideals that they share with others in a group, sometimes at a distance. So avarice is connected to knowledge, like getting knowledge, having the knowledge, being the expert, but also searching for the ultimate meaning, because there is this deeper in social 5s, this sense of like needing to know things as a way of working against a deeper sense of meaninglessness or nihilism that 5s can sometimes feel. And this 5 can look a little bit like a 7 because they're more sociable. They like to be on stage. Like my business partner, Uranio, is a social 5. Likes to sort of very passionate about teaching what he teaches and giving speeches that are based on things he deeply believes and things that he's expert in. The sexual 5, it's confidence, as in like that's having that special sense of trust with someone else. And here the focus is on the search for an ideal exemplar of absolute love. It's a more 4-ish, more emotional 5, but usually not expressing their emotions directly. It's usually through some mediums like art or photography. And they often sort of are looking for that one perfect person that I can finally open up to and share my secrets, but I won't feel safe until then. So still pretty 5-ish. So the self-preservation 5 growth path is about observing the need for boundaries, but seeing also how boundaries can lead to further impoverishedness. They can cut off the 5 from relationships that are nurturing. Learning to be a little more open, learning to open up a little more, communicating with others more, allowing themselves to need more from others, which can be very hard for this 5. The social 5, and Claudio Naranjo was a social 5 when he was alive. It's good to broaden the focus from knowledge to people, because social 5s will kind of bypass the having to talk to people part and go more to the knowledge or the learning part. And also they tend to have a very in-group, out-group, like the people who are expert in this and the people who aren't. And these people are special and these people don't know as much. So noticing the reactivity around not knowing or not knowing enough and being the person that needs to know more than everyone else, and allowing for more feelings and more awareness of feelings and integrating feelings. So for the sexual 5, the growth path is about observing how your high level of need for trust is part of what makes it hard to actually find the right relationship partner, right? When you're looking for that perfect person, there's a lot of people who aren't going to make the cut. right? And so having a romanticized ideal and needing a lot out of that intimate partner can actually make for less intimate partners. But there's also a big desire for sexual fives to go deep, but with the right person. So allowing themselves to share a little bit more with more people and not having needing to have every relationship go so deep. So then the six's passion of fear gets expressed in 3 different ways. And I talked a little bit about this with the self-preservation 6 being the phobic 6. So it's interesting because in Claudio Naranjo's book, Character and Neurosis, which I believe is a very important book, he talks about all 9 types in each chapter, just about one, like 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3. But in type 6, he talks about 3 6s. He almost can't just talk about 1 6. He talks about the affectionate 6, the obedient 6, and the aggressive 6. So the self-preservation 6 is that 6, remember I said, who expresses separation anxiety when fear mixes with the self-preservation instinct. Social 6s cope with fear by becoming super responsible and finding a good authority and following the rules of that authority. And then sexual 6s cope with fear by going against fear with strength. That's the counterphobic. So the self-preservation 6 is like a teddy bear. The most phobic, fear manifests as insecurity. And they cope with fear by finding protectors and friends. It's like, let's all bunch together in the presence of danger with like-minded friends, seeing things more as doubtful or uncertain. So the self-preservation 6 is the one that doubts the most, right? And these can look like 2s or 9s, whereas the social 6 is a little bit about, sorry about that thing that didn't come out. They deal with fear through finding a good authority and then adhering to the rules and reference points of that authority. They're concerned with knowing what the duty is, right? Like if you go to Germany, everybody follows the rules of the road. Everybody's driving in the right lane at the right speed. Everybody waits for the light before they cross. And this 6 can look like a 1, but they have a love of precision and a dislike of ambiguity. So they're more sure of themselves. It's more like someone who really sort of finds the authority and knows how to do it. So they find that they cope with their fear through being more duty bound, more responsible, and an intolerance of ambiguity and uncertainty. You're going to find the certainty because you're following the rules. So the sexual 6 is the counter type, and they deal with fear by being strong, by being scary themselves to keep the enemy at a distance. It's like the best defense is a good offense, right? So the best defense is an attack. So this is the biggest contrarian, and it's the one that is a little bit more 8-ish, right? It's like they're coming on with a strong front, even if they may be trembling or being scared underneath. They don't look afraid on the outside, and they move toward situations of fear or risk. And then the self-preservation 6 growth path, as you might imagine, observing, like finding protection in yourself, not just through others, right? Getting in touch with your own power and authority and stop projecting it out onto other people who then you want to protect you or you get scared of. Self-preservation 6s can be 6s who don't express anger, and they're afraid of anger and other people's anger. So they need, when they grow, to get more in touch with their anger and more in touch with their belly and more in touch with anger because they get more in touch with self-confidence and self-assertion, and they can be more strong rather than looking for other people to be strong for them. The social 6 growth path, observing that desire for a good outside authority and having your own authority, having the courage to go more for pleasure than for duty. And by the way, this is an actual picture from when a German team won a game during the World Cup. I have relatives in Germany, and a good friend of mine said in that Germany, I'm not going to remember what year it was, but he basically said it was the first, he was about 30. It's the first time in his lifetime he felt like it was okay to root for his home team, Germany. So this was after they won a goal in a World Cup, and you can see they're getting a little bit more instinctual, a little bit more in the heart, a little bit more crazy. But it's, I think the German culture is a good example of the 6 growth path, and being able to go more from courage and own your authority rather than projecting it out onto a good authority and then following the rules, getting a little more crazy. The sexual 6 growth path a little bit about allowing themselves to be more in touch with fear and vulnerability underneath the strong front, right? So they need to get more in touch with fear. The self-pres 6 is already too much in touch with fear. They need to get more in touch with strength and aggression. This 6 needs to stop being so aggressive and assertive and get more in touch with the fear underneath, allowing themselves to be disarmed and learning to go more to the vulnerable. Then finally, last but not least, 7, the passion of gluttony gets expressed in 3 different ways. The self-preservation 7 focuses on finding security through pleasure and through getting needs met, often through a network of allies. They're very creative about how they get their needs met, but very focused on their own self-interest and getting needs met, sometimes by knowing the right person to ask. The social 7 is the counter type that expresses a kind of anti-gluttony through being of service to others and wanting to be good in demonstrating of an ideal of service in the things they do. And the sexual 7 channels gluttony into an idealistic search for the best imaginable experiences. The sexual 7 is the biggest dreamer, the one who lives in their imagination the most. So the self-preservation 7 is sometimes called the keeper of the castle. They're more of a playboy type, having fun, doing things out of pleasure, but also through making good alliances, almost creating a good, Naranjo called it kind of a good family network or a mafia. Like I know where to go when I need different things. Practical and pragmatic. So the self-preservation 7 is a practical and pragmatic 7, and the sexual 7 is the opposite. They're not practical and pragmatic. They're more idealistic dreamer, like, oh, all the great things I can imagine, but not always bringing it down to earth in reality, and not really always wanting to see that stark, ordinary reality and the way things are there, right? But the self-pres 7 is more, they're better at looking at the negative data, like in business. They're more materialistic, more earthy, good at making things happen, good at getting what they want, because they will kind of get down on the ground and see, okay, what's not working here, and what do I need to do to get what I want, or to have the pleasure I want, or to get my need met. And so a little bit more willing to work on the ground practically to make things happen. They can look like 6s in that they tend to be a little more in touch with anxiety, which is often true of the self-preservation dominant, but they can be a little bit more 6-ish. The social 7, sacrifice. This is a really interesting type. And again, if you don't know this type and you don't know this approach to the subtypes, you're gonna be of no good to a social 7, because social 7s are really important. When we work with them, they sacrifice themselves for others, and they are 7-ish, right? They tend to be very, very upbeat outlook. They tend to be enthusiastic, optimistic, all the 7 stuff, but they also want to be good. They want to be seen as good. And it's almost as if they have something inside that tells them that gluttony makes them want to get more for themselves and leave less for others. Here, this person is giving the bigger piece of cake to the other person and taking the smaller piece. It's almost as if, like saying, I want to be seen as a good person and I want to take away the pain of the world, right? I want to make the world a better place. They have a kind of utopian outlook. And so it's like, I want to make things better for the people around me, which means I need to sacrifice my own desire to have pleasure or to feel good, because and you see them in jobs like being chaplains or doctors and nurses, hospice nurses, hospice chaplains and counselors, because they're there to help other people in times of pain, but it's because they want to take pain out of their field of vision, not because they're feeling the pain. It's as if they want to get rid of all the pain of the world. So, and again, they're the social dominant, so they can't help but feel what's in the collective, but they want to get rid of the pain. And so the problem is, though, they take a lot on themselves, that on themselves. So there's 7s that have a lot of internal conflict. They tend to be more emotional inside, because it's as if they're sometimes feeling the pain, or they're feeling the pain of there still being pain. And they give of themselves a lot to others, and so sometimes don't get as much of what they want. And so there can be this inner struggle between being selfish, like they're afraid of being seen as selfish, but then sometimes you need to get what you want. So they can also be a bit powerful. They can look like 8s or sometimes 9s. And then suggestibility, which means being easy to hypnotize, right? So this is the lighthearted enjoyer, the dreamer, gluttons for things of the higher world, very idealistic. It's like everything's are the way I dream they are, as opposed to the way they actually are. It's like they have this big need to imagine the world as much better than it really is. So they wear rose-colored glasses. They embellish the way things are. Being easy to hypnotize, they're very naive, easy to trick into things because they're sort of seeing the best in everything, and not always seeing the way things really are. I like this. This is also from the Lego movie, which this is from Everything is Awesome. Any idea is a good idea, except the not happy ones. Those you push down deep inside where you'll never, ever, 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 ever find them. I love that from the Lego movie. So the self-preservation 7 needs to own their self-interested motives, to see how much they operate from self-interest. And they sometimes don't have empathy for others because they're sort of so much focused on getting their own needs met. Noticing how they can be very opportunistic, and how that comes from a desire for security, but how it often drives them to be less empathetic for others and focus more on themselves and not as much be supporting others, and how that impacts things, and making room for what others want and others' feelings. The social 7 growth path, observing the motives and being of service, that you really want to take away other people's pain so you don't have to see it or feel it. Noticing this glutton, anti-glutton polarity, notice how you sacrifice yourself. A little bit like self-preservation 4s will carry the pain of others in the family system. Social 7s kind of carry the pain for others in the family system as a sacrifice so that other people can feel less pain. And exploring that taboo on selfishness and getting in touch with this inner conflict between wanting to be seen good for your sacrifice, but also sometimes needing to get what you want and be satisfied in life yourself. And then the sexual 7 needs to take into account reality. This is the 7 that has the hardest time being with pain, both of them, their own and others. They need to see that they're living in their imagination, see how much they live in a rose-colored reality, like they're living through the eyes of someone who's in love, and how sometimes that first flush of love fades and you need to be in touch with the reality. So exploring what's really happening on the ground, and noticing what's really, really true on the ground, that reality that sometimes they don't see. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing right there and see if there are any questions in the last 15 minutes we have left.
Wow, B, I cannot believe you taught that much in that amount of time. You managed to like condense the absolute most important stuff. Thank you. Absolutely amazing. I'm sure everyone is just blown away. Hey? All the claps, please. Yes. So let's hear some questions. I'm sure you've been making some notes. I saw in the chat, Deb said, can you talk a little bit about nature and nurture around the instincts, the dominant instinct?
Sure, yeah. So, and again, this is what Uranio and I believe, but also other people that we feel very aligned with theoretically, like A.H. Almas and Sandra Maitri. We believe that type and subtype and dominant instinct is with us from birth. We believe this is nature. We believe we come in with this. And from a spiritual sense, you almost might see it as a soul's journey through many lifetimes, if you believe in that. But also, if you don't believe in that, just psychologically, when little babies are born, when kids come into the world, they're not blank screens. They very much come in with as they are. I don't have children, but I'm very close to my niece and nephew, my brother's 2 kids. And my nephew, when he was born, when he was like 1, 2, 3 years old, I could see so clearly that he was a self-preservation 9. Not just that he was a 9, but he was a self-preservation 9. And again, I wasn't like needing to be right or anything, but I just noticed it. And as he grew, it only became more and more clear. Now he's 20 and he took our Enneagram compass test and he came out as a self-pres 9. He's yep, that's me. So it's held true, but we think it's with us from birth. So it's nature, but of course, nurture also plays a role in how our personality gets expressed, right? But we think nature has more of a role to play in how rigid or flexible our personality defenses are. Because remember, personality is a defensive self-structure. It plays a protective role in childhood. Now, of course, when we reach adulthood, we need to kind of wake up to the fact that we're still using the protective mechanisms we used in childhood, and we don't need them anymore as adults, right? That's why we need to also heal our trauma and do psychological work, because then in adulthood, the job is to see the patterns more clearly so we can let them go, right? But in childhood, the nurture part is depending on how much trauma you had, depending on how much support you had, how much your needs got met or not. And of course, I believe that it's just inevitable that our needs don't get met 100%. In the beginning of my book, I have a quote from Karen Horney, who is a super important psychological author connected to Naranjo. He also quotes her in his book. And she said, I love what she says. She has a beautiful way of describing the human, predicament given what we need as humans, we're all going to grow to be our higher selves. We're all going to grow. We're all like acorns that can break open our shell and grow to become an oak tree. But of course, there are many ways our needs don't get met in childhood. It's just because we grow up in a human world, in an unconscious world. And so in childhood, the nurture part is how much did we get support or not? And sometimes it's a fit. Sometimes with the most well-intentioned parents, if their type is really different than ours, they just didn't really understand what we needed. And so when we don't get our needs met, then our personality defenses need to be stronger. When we have trauma, our personality types need to be stronger. And so when we heal trauma and do our psychological work, we can heal those things and grow. But we believe that the nature part is our type and our instincts built in.
Thank you. And there's some other questions in the chat. I'll check if I missed any, but I'm seeing Claudia's one. Do you see any sorts of patterns or correlation between instincts and types? For example, are there more SO or SP1s in the world? I'm assuming compared to SX1s. Or is there a higher prevalence of SX and 4s? Just a wondering.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to say because, we just don't have the kind of statistics. Of course, people get mistyped, it's hard to account for all the people in the world and what type they might be. And I will tell you this, the types we get coming to our deep inner work retreats we tend to get some types more than others, but I think that's because not all types want to go to a deep inner work retreat, right? And I also think we tend to get a ton of self-pres 4s, and I think partly it's because they have nowhere else to go, right? Because there are a lot of approaches to the Enneagram that don't even acknowledge the existence of a self-preservation 4 in the way that we talk about them. And we've worked with many of them, so we know they exist. But I think that's just impossible to say. We just don't have the statistics.
Thank you. And then can you change subtype is one of the questions there. That was
Right.
Nola asking that. Thanks, Nola.
So as we grow, the idea is at first to balance our instincts. Now, I come from a place of it's very hard to create change. Our personalities, for all of us who have been on the path and trying to change, some of these things are deeply ingrained habits and it's just hard to change. And with the instincts, they derive from survival, right? And so they can be even harder to change because it's sort of like that survival brain in us is keeps saying, no, but you're going to die if you don't do this, right? Behind all the subtypes, behind all the instincts, all 3 instincts. So they're hard to change. That said, I don't think you change completely your subtype, but you can change it somewhat. Now, if my partner Uranio was here, we have this levels of awareness model, and it's based on the Enneagram itself. And he would say, when we get to much higher levels of consciousness, then it changes, right? It's almost like we become upside down, but that's a high level of consciousness, right? So I think it is possible to change, but it's kind of like we have to be in the process of really working on reining in our dominant, bringing up our repressed, working on our subtype patterns for a while to see some shift. But the goal is to shift. And of course, I believe that the Enneagram does help us change. So it's a little bit more about bringing the instincts into balance. and changing a bit, you know, like bringing up more that looking a little bit more like the subtype that you aren't than you did before, then maybe changing completely.
Yes, just quickly, I changed with COVID. I was a social 7. Then with COVID, it changed me to an SP because I had time to do the self-work. I had to be alone. And so I changed to an SP, and I feel much more comfortable and happier in the SP than the SO.
Interesting, interesting. I mean, that I think you're right that when there is something like that, like, you know, COVID was such a self-pres thing that all of us went through. Now, it could be that you were a self-pres before and you just weren't as seeing it as clearly, or maybe the social was high. Sometimes our second one is so high, it's hard to tell which is which, and that COVID really made it clearer. Or, you know,
Yes.
yeah, sometimes we do have that sense of like, I was living more from this. Sometimes maybe your family system made you be that a little bit more, but living
Yeah.
on your own and under circumstances where you're sort of apart from that system, then who you really are can come, how you're really wired can come out a little bit more. So
Okay.
yeah, I think what you're saying
Thank you.
makes sense. And certainly, like, if someone's not self-preservation dominant, but they have a health crisis, you know, or they lose their job, sometimes that can be it. If someone's not a social, but they become a leader of a big organization, sometimes that can shift things. That happened for me. I wanted to work on my social, which is second, and I became a leader of an organization. I did group facilitation training, and it was my second, but I was able to shift it quite a bit, to the point where Claudio Naranjo one time when he saw me thought I was a social, but I'm definitely still self-preservation because I still battle with those issues and those problems.
Thank you. And then there's one here. Should we try to get to subtype before the core number? And then there's a related question of what is your recommended methodology of typing? I think those go together quite well.
Yeah, I recommend looking for your type first, and then subtype, but I recommend looking for your instinct through your subtype, right? Because it's a little bit hard sometimes to say whether you're sexual, social, or self-preservation dominant, because it can be a little bit tricky depending on what type you are. But I think if you try, it's easier to find which type you are, and then it's good to kind of look at which one of these 3 versions of this type fits me the best. Now, sometimes, like, I do typing interviews still, and I really like doing typing interviews. When when I'm doing a typing interview, I'm asking questions about each of the 9 types, and I'm really trying to look for type first. But since I have the subtype so much inside my head, I'll start sniffing out a self-pres 4, for instance, right? Or I'll start sniffing out a social 7 because I have that can help me. But first I'm mainly looking for the type, because if we look for the subtype, sometimes I think we can, you know, not get the instinct quite clear. And I would look for I would confirm your instinctual sequence in terms of the subtype descriptions. That will be important to do.
Thank you. Great. Let's see.
Oh, and in terms of typing, in terms of recommending methodology of typing, so we teach typing in our school. We have our own test. You know, it's sort of similar to the IAQ. It's the Enneagram Compass. We really wanted to create our own report with using our own theory. So we teamed up with someone who had created a test, and so we have the Enneagram Compass that we use. Now, I think tests can be good, but I always recommend using a test with another method, because you need, and those of you who are trained know that you need to validate the outcome of the test, because tests, you know, tests are only as good as self-reports. So we also teach a typing interview in our typing course. We just did it in last month. It's a 2-day course where we teach people to do a really thorough interview, and how to ask follow-up questions, and how to do a systematic interview. And I think the best approach is, if you can use a test, but always to also learn to do a really good typing interview, or send them to a practitioner that you know that does good typing interviews.
Thank you. That's amazing. And the instinct shifting during life events, Hart's question related to an earlier question about that. The COVID one with Nola. if you can maybe just talk about that, if there's anything more in that, Hart, maybe you want to unmute if there's more to the question than was already covered.
I think it was pretty well covered. I mean, I have seen just, I love that the Nola who brought up the pandemic, because I saw a massive shift in clients that I knew pre and post pandemic. So I was with them before, watching them during the pandemic and seeing where they are now. And for some of them, it like dramatically seemed to have changed how they're showing up in their subtype.
Interesting. Yeah, I do think that like if someone's self-preservation repressed, and by the way, we didn't have time to talk about that, but my business partner, Uranio, has done brilliant work on describing the not only the what people with particular repressed instincts are like, but also what people are like with the whole sequence. And what instinct is repressed also has a lot to say about you. Now, I would think that it would be harder for, say, like your repressed instinct to become your main one, but I do think if it's in the middle, it probably could come up more, or those two could change, or really you thought you were this one, but it's really this one. I think it might change more that way. But for instance, self-preservation repressed people, they really don't take care of themselves and sometimes even have a unconscious suicidal tendency, right? It's a real, almost like I give up on my life. My life isn't important. Now, and by the way, there are other dimensions to this, maybe I'll mention in the last minute, that are also interesting. For instance, we tie the instincts to the psychology of each person, right? So for instance, the self-preservation instinct is connected to the mother figure. The social instinct is connected to the father figure, and the sexual instinct is connected to the mother, father, child triangle and the Oedipal situation, right? Sexual dominants are often the Oedipal winner. In other words, they won over the parent, the archetypally opposite sex parent from the other parent, and so there's a lot that's fascinating in there. And in our work retreats, sometimes we do that. For instance, a sexual dominant person who has never been able to feel satisfied in a relationship with a partner because they're still married to one of their parents, right? Literally married. And so we often perform a divorce ceremony and do a cut with that sexual dominant person who is still connected to their mother or their father. And it's interesting, like in China, we teach a lot in China, and sometimes in China, the people are even more sincere. It's almost like they don't pretend about anything. And you'll see a sexual dominant woman like crying. No, I don't want to let go of my father, even though he died, no. And it's like, what takes us a long time to get the person to actually let go of their father. So there are even more dimensions to this. I guess this is a good thing to say in the last moment. And I've even gone a couple of minutes over. So more to learn. And we hope you'll be intrigued enough by this study, and that you'll join us sometime in some of the work we do around the instincts and the subtypes, and you'll see it as central and important and fruitful as we do. And thank you, Ingrid, and thank you, Deborah, and thank you, all of you, for having me, for inviting me to be with you. It's really great to connect with South Africa again. Hi, Lee. It's been a long time since I've seen you. It's really, really good to be with you. I have such great memories of all my times in South Africa. And when it was Suzette Fisher is a dear friend, and really, really miss being there and miss your community. So thank you so much for letting me be with you for a while.
Just amazing. Thank you so much. I can't tell you how grateful we are for this beautiful time and your generosity. And thanks so much, Deb, for making this possible and inviting B. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's beautiful to see you. And B, obviously, you'll share all the links and the link to the Enneagram Compass and where people can sign up to the CP Academy platform. It's a fantastic thing to be a member of the CP Academy. There are webinars, there are wonderful videos of all topics about the Enneagram. You can't even believe what's there. If you want to find out about the law of three, in you go and find that, all BE subtype videos in detail. It's like you have to actually subscribe to that, I think.
I
part
do
of
have
the
I do have a subtype booklet that's available through my website, BeatriceChestnut.com. If you go to the books page, it's impossible to send the hard copy to South Africa, but you can get a downloadable PDF version. And we have our CPS Enneagram 2.0 podcast. CP Online is our online platform, but yeah, we hope you'll join us, and we have a great community. Thank you again.
And B, I just wanted, firstly, I wanted to say thank you, but also there's just so many resources and the generosity in sharing them. So, for example, there's a podcast on Spotify, CP Enneagram, and if you really want to understand a type, what I found so useful, I go back when I'm coaching. B, for example, when you did type 9 in the last one, with a dear friend of ours, I sent it on to one of the people I was coaching. He says, now I get it. Now I get what it means to be a type 9. So there's that human connection. And I love listening to the podcasts on Spotify are they on YouTube as well, Beatrice?
Yes, on YouTube as well.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have resources that are kind to share with our clients, because a lot of clients, you don't want to kind of rub their nose in the vice and shame them. That for me is very important from a trauma-informed perspective. And I know that's what I was saying at the beginning, the truth and the kindness together. So those resources you're talking about, Deb, it's safe to share them with the client without them feeling as though they're having immature open heart surgery.
And if anyone's keen to join a retreat, there's retreats in London in May next year. If anyone's keen to do the psychological retreat is in London, and that's the first retreat. It's in May, mid-May, second week of May, I think. If you go onto the website, you can find the details. If you want to ask me, you can reach out to me if you want to hear more about how it works.
Thanks, Deb. Is your email address in the chat?
I'll put it in.
Thanks. And BeatriceChestnut.com, you'll find beautiful stuff there. Yeah, thank you for your amazing contribution to this transmission. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for being with you. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.